Welcome to the session on what makes a great IoT platform. My name is Dima Tokar. I'm a co-founder and CTO of a company by the name of MachNation. MachNation is an IoT-focused research firm. So you can think of us as a small Gartner or small Forrester, exclusively focused on the IoT markets. And within the IoT markets, our focus is on the upper layers of the technology stack. So we are primarily focused on looking at enterprise IoT and looking at platforms for data, platforms for device management, applications, services, analytics, everything that sort of sits just above the connectivity layer once you get data into the system. We're in our 4th year of business as an IoT research firm, and we work with sort of a large number of players, both startups as well as Fortune 100 companies, and provide both research as well as strategy and marketing support. As far as the types of companies that we work with, sort of a combination of service providers as well as enterprises that build things. So Bosch and Philips are a good example of the guys that make the things. Companies like Orange and Vodafone are the guys that provide all sorts of services for enterprises on top of that. As an analyst firm, we are both a research company as well as a media company, so we get quoted in general publications such as the Wall Street Journal, but also more specific ones like InfoWorld and IoT Now, which is an IoT-focused publication. So what I want to talk to you about today is what makes a great IoT platform. But more specifically, I want to talk to you about a set of IoT platforms called the AEPs. And in order to sort of talk about AEPs, I need to define what an AEP is, but also to define what all the other platforms that are out there today that are all sort of grouped as IoT platforms. And in order to be able to talk about anything meaningfully, we have to define a term. So I'm going to briefly go over these and just sort of paint the picture of what each one does and how we differentiate them from each other. So AEPs, and I'll provide a slightly more detailed definition in a second, but essentially these are horizontal, industry-agnostic platforms that provide data as well as device management for IoT solutions in the enterprise. Platform-enabled solutions are solutions oriented at specific verticals built on top of an in-house IoT platform. So for instance, a company like Bosch provides all sorts of services. They have a platform, but in this case, they're providing those services on top of their platform. They're not necessarily exposing their APIs directly to an enterprise to build apps on top of it. And then in that category, you have startups like Samsara, which are end-to-end solutions, which have APIs, but their primary goal is to provide a solution for a specific market. DMPs are device management platforms. So these are companies that focus exclusively on allowing you to manage the IoT device, not from a connectivity perspective, but from a machine operations perspective. So in other words, updating firmware, putting processes onto the edge, onto the device. So these are guys that are enabling you to manage your fleet and do things beyond what a connectivity management platform can do, which is essentially provision connectivity and deprovision connectivity, and do the rates and billing and so on and so forth. Those are the CDPs. So these are companies like Jasper, Ericsson CDP. Essentially, their target market is enabling service providers to manage the connectivity element and provide updates with respect to connectivity to various devices. And then finally, two other categories of companies that don't really fit into any of the buckets I mentioned so far are big data and analytics players. So again, platforms whose primary role is to ingest data, process it, make some kind of meaningful insight out of it. They don't try to do the other things that I talked about above. And then finally, IoT OSS, BSS. So these are organizations that enable all of that IoT orchestration, mediation layers within carriers, within service providers that was traditionally done for cellular, but now with IoT, it's expanding to other forms of communication and with additional requirements that are specific to IoT. And my point with this slide is to really say that in order to have any meaningful discussion about what makes a good platform, you have to say which one of these you're talking about, because otherwise you have this very general set of criteria that aren't very meaningful and aren't particularly insightful. So in this presentation, I'm going to talk about AEPs, the first category. And so we have a definition. It's slightly wordy, but I'll read it anyways just to capture the essence of what an AEP is to us. And so it's a technology-centric offering optimized to deliver a best-of-breed, industry-agnostic, extensible middleware core for building a set of interconnected or independent IoT solutions for customers. So in other words, AEP is a platform that enables IoT solutions to build on top of it. So it is an enabling layer that sits above the connectivity layer and below the application layer that enables all sorts of platforms and all sorts of applications to interact with it. It provides a central core for data processing and device management and authorization, authentication, so on and so forth. So why do we care about IoT AEPs? Well, according to our research, it is a huge market opportunity. This is, as an analyst, I have to provide you with some kind of forecast. Otherwise, you guys would not respect my presentation. So this is our forecast that we put together for IoT app enablement revenue. And so our projection is that in 2017, it is a $2 billion market. And by 2025, it will be roughly an $84 billion market for this application enablement layer. And the compound annual growth is roughly 60% a year for this time period. So big opportunity already, and also very fast growing. So I think I have a laser pointer here. So this is a quick architecture. So it's sort of intended to simplify things a little bit, but sort of just to point out where I was describing. So we have the AEPs right here. So they sit above the connectivity, and we see applications for various verticals built on top of this application enablement platform. The platform-enabled solutions that I described earlier are sort of more monolithic technology stacks where you have the platform, but as well as the actual application pretty tightly integrated into the technology. So in other words, if you have a specific solution and a specific problem you want to solve, this might do it for you. If you're looking at building a set of applications today and you don't quite know what you're going to build tomorrow, you're looking at something more horizontal like the AEP that allows you to build something for today, but also not worry about what's going on. So applications at the top, data ingestions at the bottom, and then sort of eastbound, westbound, you have enterprise backends, applications, data repositories, data lakes, things like that. I want to talk to you about what we think are important criteria for these AEPs. And so just a little bit about the process that we use to determine who is doing what. So in our research, we always start with a questionnaire. So this is a questionnaire that we send out to all of the relevant vendors. We never charge for participation. We never give benefit to any companies that we work with. So a questionnaire is sent out. We get data that's self-reported from the vendor. We then schedule vendor discussions where the vendor essentially spends time clarifying what the questionnaire means, their market positioning, answering any questions that arose directly from the questionnaire. And then we always spend time with the vendor to get some kind of a product demo to really understand not just what's on paper, but what's actually happening. And in most cases, where we can get access to the platform, so in other words, there's a cloud instance or it's something we can download and spawn ourselves, we will do a hands-on evaluation of the solution to determine and to make sure that the marketing and all of the information that's being provided by the vendor is on target with what's available today. And then finally, we spend time looking at what's available externally. We speak with companies that we know, and we try to understand, sort of do our own due diligence about what is sort of the vendors actually doing in the market and what the actual production use cases are. So based on this research for AEPs, we've sort of narrowed it down to 4 key criteria that we think are important differentiators for application enablement platforms in IoT. And so what I'm going to do right now is, instead of sort of giving you a checklist for each of these, I'm going to give you some examples of what it means to have a flexible and scalable deployment model for these platforms, what it means to have a focus on the developer persona, what it means to have operational sophistication, and finally, what does it mean to have a well-executed partner strategy as a platform vendor. So the first one is flexible and scalable deployment. And so to us, this essentially means that you need to offer as a vendor a variety of deployment models which essentially allows your customer to use the platform in whatever environment they have. And so, for instance, in order to be able to offer a customer or a service provider an ability to deploy instances on demand, to spawn new solutions without the need to deploy an infrastructure, we see that the best AEPs are able to support not just a single IoT application on top of it, but they allow a customer or a service provider, that being an enterprise or an integrator of sorts, to support multiple independent solutions on a single deployment. So for instance, that requires some kind of a multi-tenant cloud approach to an AEP deployment. So you might have certain vendors that choose to go with an on-premises deployment. That's an important area to support, but ultimately to us, the most important one is to be able to provide this multi-tenant cloud to your customers. Another important element of flexibility and scalability is the ability to deploy not just in sort of that cloud or on-premises layer, but also to be able to move the business logic and the processing from the cloud to the edge and in between in the fog, as Cisco would call it. So why is that important? Because every IoT solution that we talk about is slightly different, even within the same vertical. So in other words, you don't really know how much data you're going to have to process, what the costs are associated with connectivity, what you actually need to accomplish, and with what latency. And so for that reason, we found that being able to deploy an IoT solution in different environments and being able to shift business processing, analytics, device management to different network topologies is a critically important component in order to be able to satisfy requirements of today's but also future IoT solutions. And so again, this is sort of underlining the point of not just having a solution that satisfies today's requirements, but also a solution that will satisfy whatever requirements you throw at it 3 to 5 years down the line. And from my perspective, I'll take questions at the end. Is that okay? From my perspective, these are the types of elements that when you choose them, they're extremely expensive to tear out. You're essentially feeding all of your data into the system, and then you're building all of your applications on top of it. So in order to be able, so it's not something that you want to try for one IoT solution for 1 year and then rip it out and sort of repurpose the entire project. That's expensive and time-consuming, and it's better to get it right the first time. Okay. The next element is a focus on the developer. And so I think the reality is no matter how easy an AEP solution is to use, enterprise applications are custom. There's just no way around it. Even by creating some kind of a drag-and-drop environment, the reality is there are a lot of moving pieces. There's a lot of custom legacy backends, and as a result, whatever you build, whatever you put together, it's going to be fairly custom. And so, from our perspective, the target audience for these platforms needs to be a developer. There could be secondary audience, such as a business analyst, that allows you to sort of simplify certain roles, but we believe that the developer is ultimately the most important consumer of this application enablement platform layer. And so in order to simplify developers' workflows, one of the key elements that we think are important to an AEP are device simulators and development kits. And this is to enable a developer to quickly get up and running and to test out new functionality without requiring expensive hardware and without requiring lots of different teams working cross-functionally, because that's just not how projects generally start. They generally start in some kind of a silo where there's a team that's looking to prove out an ROI or prove out some kind of concept. And in order to do that, device simulators, development kits, and any kind of get up and running quickly elements are really important. And then finally, the second element that we found is to be very critical is to provide some kind of visualization for the data that's coming off of the device. And the reason for that is not so much that we think that these are going to be the interfaces for an enterprise application, but rather because these dashboards greatly accelerate the initial development and the ability to get up and running with an IoT solution. And so these types of components are developer-friendly elements that enable an IoT solution to be taken from, say, a test device or a test set of machines, and to be able to prove out the concept, to prove out the value to the business, and then move on, and then you will sort of have the traditional developer workflow with your traditional developer tool chain, APIs. That comes second, but the dashboards are a really valuable element to initial IoT development. Third is operational sophistication. And so operational sophistication to us means that once you've built an IoT solution and once you've deployed it in production, it's not over. One of the bigger challenges of IoT is to find the right people in your organization that are going to be able to manage it, and to find to provide them with the toolkits that enable them to be successful with dealing with outages, dealing with updates, dealing with security. And what we found common across platforms that do quite well with this operational sophistication component are interfaces that enable management not just of 10 or 15 or 30 devices, which almost every platform has today, but also interfaces that enable management at scale. So ability to manage 1,000 or 10,000 or 50,000 devices is something that's unique to just a handful of platforms out there today. And these interfaces, either API-based or visual, enable an enterprise to be comfortable with deploying an IoT solution to the market and knowing that they have full control over what's going on in the ecosystem. They know that they have an ability to update a device if there's a security vulnerability that's available. They know that they can know that a device is up to code, and they can also deal with fraud and stolen devices and things like that without worrying that some of their data is going to leak out of the system. And then finally, the second element of operational sophistication is some kind of a unified interface that enables all of this management to happen in one place rather than providing sort of ad hoc interfaces across the different device capability sets or different data management sets that offer a single functionality but require an operations person to go through different sort of hoops in order to be able to address sort of enterprise management needs. And we also sort of among the administration capabilities, we look for platforms that enable sort of user and role-based access controls to provide different sets of functionality to different users that are going to own different elements of an IoT solution or a set of IoT solutions. And so in our case, we look for an ability to delegate a certain set of roles for device management and another one towards monitoring. And so that's just a way for us to ensure that the IoT solutions are manageable and that they are responsive to the needs of the user. And then finally, the fourth element, and then I will open up the floor for questions and for any kind of thoughts that you have on the presentation, is a well-executed partner strategy. So AEPs, as I described today, are a very important component of an IoT solution, but they're not the only component. There are almost always, from our research, we found 5 to 7 different players that you have to work with in order to put together an end-to-end IoT solution. And so as a result, AEPs, since they are very much centered in working with different players from the southbound side, where they're communicating with devices and using different communications mediums, all the way to the top layers, where they're working with applications and they're working with different solutions built on top of the AEP, as well as all sorts of enterprise integration backends, sort of to the eastbound and the westbound side of the IoT solution. And so as a result, it's critical that AEPs have a partnership strategy that acknowledges that an AEP is an important component, but doesn't say that it does everything under the sun and that this is the only vendor that you have to work with in order to build something from scratch. And so what we've found, there are sort of two good elements that are strong indicators of a vendor's ability to provide this sort of holistic strategy for their IoT solution. So one of them is a strong set of partnerships and integrations with multiple device makers. And so the reason that's important is because we found that is in every industry vertical and every different specialized use case, there's a separate set of devices that are being used in IoT today. And out-of-the-box integration saves a lot of time for development, and a commitment to support those devices throughout the lifecycle of that device is an extremely important component, and it allows companies building on top of the AEP to not have to worry about whether the next version of the device will be supported, whether you have to do additional integration testing each time a new device comes out. And this enables integrators to provide a wide array of functionality on top of the AEP. And then, as I mentioned, integrators, these guys are the ones that are going to be building this IoT solution. And so we view AEPs as traditionally technology-centered companies that are focused on providing a best-of-breed software approach or software and hardware approach to applications for IoT. And within IoT, you have sort of the guys that build the components, and then you have other guys that assemble the product. And so a partnership with a set of integrators that can provide a global coverage for IoT solutions is critically important in the AP, because that's kind of where they pass off their product, and they pass it on to a set of vendors that understand verticals, they understand specific customer needs, and they are able to take the AEP as well as the other components of the IoT technology stack and assemble them together in a cohesive solution that works and addresses all of the enterprise requirements of the vendor. And these business partnerships are important to the AP for two reasons. One is that these are the really guys that understand the market and understand the vertical solutions that they're building. But also it allows the AEP to focus on the technology that's truly horizontal and truly a best-of-breed approach, rather than building out features based on specific customer requests to address a certain vertical need. So in our perspective, AEPs are technology-focused offerings that provide a set of functionality that then pass off their technology to a set of experts that can then build solutions on top of it. And that, to us, is probably the most likely successful business model for an AEP type of approach. So to summarize, as the AEP industry grows from roughly $2 billion to $80 billion by 2025, enterprises and service providers are looking for the best AEP technology to build their business. And there are a lot of companies out there that are platforms, but if you have one takeaway from this presentation, it's that take a step back and ask and try to figure out what exactly is that platform doing, what customer requirements are they trying to address, and ask the right questions. Ask them about specific use cases you might have for your business, and ask them whether their technology supports it, and ask for a demo. Ask them to show you how it works. Because what we found is that there is a lot of hype today around platforms, and there's quite a lot of marketing that basically makes all platforms seem very alike. And as I sort of described, all of the platforms out there are not alike, and there are sort of 4 key characteristics that determine whether an AEP solution is likely to be something that you'll want to choose for your enterprise, and whether it's a solution that will be satisfying the requirements not only today, but also in the next 3 and 5 and 10 years as you build out not just your first, but also your second, your third, and your fourth IoT solution in your business.